Hello, everyone. I am Corey Andrew Powell, and I am so thrilled today to welcome Patrick Huey. He's a true trailblazer in the realms of luxury, hospitality, and wellness and podcasting. Patrick's journey from the stage to the boardroom exemplifies the power of embracing unexpected opportunities and saying yes to life's surprises. As the first Black chairman of the board for the International Spa Association, Patrick has not only shattered barriers, but also enriched the global spa and wellness industries with his leadership and vision. Patrick, welcome to Motivational Mondays.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Corey. I'm so happy to be a part of your mission and what you're doing with your platforms. It's very important that we hear these different voices for Black people, people of color, people who aren't represented in these spaces. So thank you for what you do.
Oh wow. Well, I'm very honored because you do some great work too in that same space. You have a podcast and your very representation in the luxury brand space is really monumental. So we were just talking before we began about that. And I would love to elaborate a little bit on that for the public because what I have seen in the past was like there was this well, I would say misrepresentation that the Black demographic, the African American demographic specifically, is not one that should be catered to by the luxury goods companies. The misconceptions about maybe income, whatever those things may be, just stereotypes about interest, whatever it is. And we know that is completely bogus. I mean, we're there. A lot of us have the money. We want those experiences. So for you, how did you navigate, between maybe what people's perceptions were and what you believed you could be?
That's No one's ever asked me that question before. For me, part of it was how I was probably raised, where I was sort of raised that I could be anything that I wanted to be. Growing up, I obviously wasn't staying at luxury resorts or traveling around the world. But when those things became available to me, I felt that I belonged in those spaces and that I didn't have to make apologies for who I was or what color I was, et cetera. But I felt like I belonged in those spaces. And I think that's a function of how I was raised and how I grew up, that I belonged here. I could add value here. I think partly also when I was really sort of entering into the luxury wellness space, it wasn't because that's what I wanted to do. It was strictly, I needed a job to survive. I
Mm,
needed to earn income. And so my attention was elsewhere, which kind of allowed me to excel in a way because I felt no pressure and I
mm,
didn't feel oversensitive or oversensitized in those spaces. So I think
right.
that's really how it happened.
Right. As opposed to sort of taking the approach of here's this big elitist society and I want to get there. And then you're kind of intimidated potentially by all of the barriers that are in place systemically. You didn't have
Yeah.
that.
I
Yeah,
mean,
you're
no, and you obviously if you're in these spaces and you're one of one or two or three, you are aware of that.
hmm
But when you're called into those spaces, you still have to you have to still deliver, perform, and feel like you belong to be there.
mm,
So, you know, it's true that these are sometimes not the most diverse places to be. They're much better than they were when I first started, 20 plus years ago.
right.
But whenever you are one of one, one of two, one of three in a space, you still have to take up space
hmm
and feel like you belong there.
Yeah.
And I guess I've never sort of doubted that I belonged in any space I wanted to occupy.
Mm.
And you kind of have to have that kind of belief in yourself.
No,
You
I
know,
love that. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I love that. Also, I love the way you prefaced it was based on how you were brought up. And that's
hmm
another part of your story that I feel connected to as well. Like, we are clearly African heritage people. And the environment that I grew up in, that was a superpower that told me that I could do maybe more
yeah,
than expected. And that was all about the mother I had and how she prepared me for the world. And that's kind of what is important about that messaging because we are programming our younger selves, our children, to navigate through the world. So that's important.
yeah, it never, I grew up in a predominantly, Caucasian neighborhood. I went to predominantly white schools, even in my college years. I did my undergrad at Vanderbilt, my
hmm
master's at Yale. And it was never, whether we were Black or not, I never could come home with an F or D or C.
Right.
And B's weren't even that much, weren't
Hmm.
celebrated that much. I could never not have my act together and then say, oh, it's because I'm Black, or
Mm.
they didn't give me an opportunity because I was Black. The message was just, well, just go be better.
Hmm. So
Um,
true. Yeah.
and all those things are real, like, systemic oppression, racism, those things are real. And yet still, you have to still deliver. You still have to
Hmm.
do. Um, and I was very fortunate that I had, a mom who was engaged. I had great teachers. I had all of that. Um, but at a certain point, you have to take responsibility for it, right? Even if you don't have all of that. At a certain
Mm.
point, what are you going to do to sort of change the narrative and to feel comfortable in these spaces that are sometimes not necessarily opening up their arms for us to be there? You still got to
Right.
show be there,
Right. Show up and show out.
show
Absolutely.
up. Yeah.
And I think representation is so important. We hear a lot about that today, and representation is so important. And I will cite for me, like I had these big aspirations in like the early 90s of wanting to work in fashion, right? So I was obsessed with models. I dropped out of college because I knew like more supermodels names than dead presidents. I said, well, the history teacher thing is not going to work for me. I'm going to New York. But it was a
Yes.
matter of seeing people like Andre Talley, right? Like seeing Andre Talley, for example, that representation, that larger than life representation, physically and metaphorically, all of it being like the epitome of one of the most iconic luxury brands that exists. And that was powerful. And so people like you, and I would another Lloyd Boston, when I first discovered Lloyd Boston, I was like, that's what I want to do. And he's talking to Ralph Lauren. Like that's
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I want to do. So yeah, I just think that it's important, and your representation in these spaces, it's just really commendable. So I'm happy that you're there, and not to make the whole conversation about race, but it is the elephant. I often say it's not the elephant in the room, honey. It is the room. You know what I mean? It's like it's the room. So, um,
It's interesting when I think I was the first Black board member for ISPA and the first Black chair, and we talked about it, the ISPA team who are fantastic, and I was like, what, we're not going to lean into that narrative.
right.
We don't have to because people have eyes. They
Hmm.
can see. Let's talk about other things. And that
Yeah.
was sort of a conscious decision that we made. Whether it was right or wrong, it's up to, it's
Hmm.
the decision that was made. And I was on board with it because I was like, that is a story that we can tell. And maybe that's a story that I will tell or that someone will want to know about. But what else can we talk about?
Hmm.
And let that just sort of be. And what happens when you sort of take that off the table? And I think, especially when you're talking about representation, I think you have to sort of sometimes let the work speak for itself. You don't always have to raise the flag.
Mm.
Sometimes it just needs to be the quality of the work that you're doing. And sometimes it just has to be the fact that you're there.
Yeah.
If that's
Yeah.
what the situation requires. Now, if the situation requires you to raise the flag,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
But it doesn't always require that. Um,
Mhm.
and sometimes your message can be lost if you are not allowing the work just to stand on its own, or for you to be where you are. Maybe that's not a very popular position in the world we live in today, where we live in a world of grievance. But
Right. Right.
there is value in sometimes just showing up and being excellent. You know,
Mm.
I don't have to tell the world that I'm Black.
They have eyes. Yes, like you
Some people
said.
I do because they're like, "Are you Black?" Yeah, like Black is not always how dark you are. So that's a
Right.
whole other conversation.
Or over the phone, like if they don't see you. That's
Oh
always been
yeah,
mine. Like I
you
literally
don't
in my
sound Black.
yeah, you don't sound black, you don't speak like, you don't talk like a black guy. And so I've always had that too. And then I have this like Irish Welsh name of like Corey Andrew Powell. So they really think red hair and freckles are going to show up at that job interview, and it don't. It, the hair be out to here, and yeah, it's the polar opposite of Irish Welsh. But you
But
know,
it,
mhm,
I was gonna say it's funny that you talk about representation because on my podcast, this issue of representation comes up all the time.
yeah.
That people oftentimes who are, you know, in spaces where they're not normally found, let's say the ballet world, for instance, which was
Hmm.
years ago, I think it was the New York Times wrote an article about where are black swans. And I wish I could
Mm,
remember the writer's name, but people who were in that space were looking up and didn't see themselves. So they had to sort of elbow their own way through, pirouette their way on through to become the representation that people wanted to see.
yeah,
And when
yeah.
you see when you see the power of what a Misty Copeland can do,
Yes,
or
absolutely.
what a Kathleen Battle or a Jesse
Mm,
Norman did in these spaces where there just weren't a ton of images for people to look up to. So the representation piece is critical,
yeah.
critical,
Mm,
you know.
absolutely. Yeah. No, I love those examples because, of course, first person I thought of was Misty, obviously, when you mentioned that. And but then I also go as far too to look at the whole notion of one demographic being supreme over another is so silly in general, based on skin color, right? It's because we know that that doesn't make you smarter or better. It's all about the work ethic and the ability that you put forth. Um, I do find
Yeah.
it funny that a particular demographic would have this history of supremacy when I'm like, well, if you've excluded other people from fair competition, how do you know, really?
Yeah.
You know? And that's why once you get people like Arthur Ashe, and then you get, the Williams sisters in, and then you get Marian Anderson, for example, with opera. Like once you let us in, we will show you that it's all silly, and you're going to benefit from my gifts. Collectively, we're going to be better, and
Well,
that is the part that's missing.
it's so funny that you say that. There was a few years ago, they were doing research on how schools, like I grew up in the 70s, so schools were integrated at that point. There were
Mhm.
there were people in schools that were, it wasn't like the 60s, and it was intentionally not so. But
Right.
as we progressed and moved through, schools have segregated again. You
Hmm.
have black kids are in black schools, white kids are in white schools. All the politics and social things around that could be discussed. But studies found that when you put the kids together, the test scores for both groups went up
Mm.
because there's something that happens in that exchange between people. And
Mm.
then you said that earlier when Venus and Serena showed up on the tennis scene and they were treated so badly when they first started. But look what they did for the game, not just for
Hmm.
themselves, but for everybody. And
Yeah.
everybody raised their game. So there's something that happens when you bring people together who are not maybe what you want to have together. Oh, there's a little thumbs up. But when that happens, everything is the entire system is uplifted. To your point about us all being in these spaces together and what we contribute when you let people in, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, absolutely. I have no idea where that thumbs up just came from, by the way, because this is
you
like
can do
between
that. You
I
can
didn't
you can
do
like
it.
do the thing,
I know, but I
that, and
mean, I know, but neither of us is. So maybe like one of my producers in the back is on it. I have no idea because maybe some Zoom executive was like, "Yeah, I'm just going to drop in on," because I
right
have
on.
no idea, but it was perfect, and I'm going to have to investigate why that thumbs up just happened. Uh, but I did another on that same point, and then I definitely want to move into more about the spa work you're doing and all the stuff you're doing
Sure.
with your podcast. But it reminds me also of an interview I did about intersectionality of different identities, whether it be gender, race, sexuality, identity, sexual identity, whatever, all those things. And I was sharing, and I think you might relate to this because you were an actor as well. I was sharing a story of an audition in which the casting director had me read this role of a thug, and I'm like from Ewing Township near Princeton, New Jersey. So thug is not really part of my repertoire, but I'm
That's
an
not part of
actor.
your repertoire. Yeah.
No, and I'm much like you. I went to a predominantly white school, and it's very, but I lived in a black neighborhood though, still in that community, and that neighborhood has birthed some prominent figures from congresswomen and all, just and I just told this reporter, I said, well, the casting director told me to be more black, and I didn't understand that because in her mind it was to be a thug, and where I'm from, being more black meant Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee. It meant Diane Carroll and Dorothy Dandridge. It meant Sidney Poitier and enunciative speech and education, because my mother worked in higher ed. So, I think these ideas of stereotypes are continually perpetuated. And once we stop those, and people kind of start to see, hey, I was wrong about that group or about what I thought about people, then we can get forward beyond it. But I don't know. It seems like we're still stuck. It's 2024, and here we are still trying to prove that we're not all thugs. And, so I don't know what the outcome will be. I'm just going to remain optimistic, and hopefully the work you're doing. and work I do will make a difference.
I
Fingers
think so.
crossed.
I think it will. Fingers, I think it will. I think it will. I think it does.
Yeah, well, it has been absolutely. So your podcast, though, let's get to that.
Sure.
At the Podium, it's called, right? And you've
Yeah.
featured a diverse range of guests. And let me just tell you, there's an opening song. You have a montage of all the guests that you have had on your show. It's like just a like a montage of all the still shots and their titles and stuff. And there's like a song. Was that original music? I don't know because I was really like trying to find that on Spotify. Let me just.
Okay. So you can't find it on Spotify, but this guy that I know who's a sax player.
Mm.
He is the head of the jazz program at Brown University, and I
Oh,
met him during COVID because he was giving me saxophone lessons over Zoom.
oh
And
wow, that's
another,
cool.
I play the saxophone. Again, another genius stroke by my mother. But so during COVID, we he gave me saxophone lessons over Zoom, and I finally met
Mm.
him when the restrictions were lifted. And I went and met his wife and his kid, and we played the sax together and all that. But he is part of a several bands. But that music you're talking about, it's
Mm.
for the third season. I think that music you're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's. I will send you the information, but you can't find that on.
Because I was looking, I was like, and I Shazammed it. I'm like, this is some original stuff here,
It's
clearly, because I
original.
can't find it anywhere. But it was beautiful, and it reminded me of one of my favorite artists, Milton Nascimento from Brazil, and it had this sort of, very, it was just ethereal and gorgeous and stuff. So hats off to you on the music choice. But about the podcast itself,
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about it, the format, and what you are hoping to accomplish with this particular show.
I mean, the mission for me is pretty clear. Like it started during COVID and we really started right after the January 6th riots happened. And I was just tired of the conversation being so dark and
Mm,
so not about uplift. And I said, I want to put something out in the world that
hmm
can be counterpoint to what's happening in those
mm,
spaces and create a space where people can come together just like we're doing and share their stories, share their experiences, and not have it turn into this all the time. Because
mm.
oftentimes what the media does is they'll turn that into a conflict point. And
Right.
it's great ratings. I totally get it. But what is that doing to the people who are engaging in it and the people who are watching it if we're constantly tearing each other down and not affirming
hmm
each other's humanity and our experiences are so broad and so vast. So that's
Yeah.
what it really started as. Um, and so, I've had plenty of people on that I don't agree with, but it doesn't mean that they're evil people. I just don't agree with them. And we
hmm
can talk about that. So that's what I wanted to create a space where that could really happen. And every season
mm
has a different theme. So first season was all about embracing the power of saying yes to your life and even the unexpected things. Season two was about finding your voice and what do you do with your platforms to
mm
uplift. And then the third season is about the legacies that we leave behind and how we hope to be remembered,
mm
not necessarily tied to death, but tied to
Legacy.
when you walk legacy, when you walk through this world, how are you impacting it?
Mm.
So that's how it started all. Yeah.
Wow. And that's amazing. All three of those points that you've covered, and well, the two that you've covered and the one that you're going to cover, those are all pillars of leadership that we discuss here too, as a leadership organization. Especially when it comes to the legacy component. One of my guests once said to me, I want you to imagine, and he did kind of equate it to death, but in a very positive way, is I want you to imagine part of the process of death is that we have to walk through a filled stadium like Wembley, and it's just
Mm,
filled, and it's everyone we've ever encountered, even if you just passed them on the street and didn't even
right.
speak to them, but it's everyone. And there's two reactions: boo as you walk by, or a thunderous applause. And the notion is that you control what that response is going to be
100%.
100%. And yeah, so I mean, it is kind of related to death. I mean, what legacy are you leaving behind? What did you do while you were here? So
Yeah.
important. Mm,
Yeah. I mean, it's a privilege to be here, right? And how are you making use of your time? I was I was having a conversation with the graduating class at USC for the master's in the MFA program there. And I was talking about all the things that I do, and they were like, "Well, how do you have the energy to do that?" And I was like, "Well, what else are you going to do? What are you going to do with this time that you have? Contribute the energy while you're here,
hmm
because you're not here forever, and being here is a gift. Whether
mm.
you think you come back or not, I don't know. But I'm here right now. What am
Yeah.
I doing? You know,
Yeah, yeah.
you have to
It's so
contribute.
true.
You gotta, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, because you can't, I mean, it's like, especially when you've like I've in my family, we've had like a lot of loss in the past like year and a half, 2 years that was just sort of well, not unexpected, but it was a lot compounded of
yeah.
multiple people in my immediate family who passed away from different things. And that sort of thing really does make you think, okay, I don't know how much time I have left here. And it makes me be a little bit more conscious, a lot more conscious. And so I talk to young people all the time about the correlation between your personal brand
Mm,
and the legacy you leave behind. Because a lot of young people, none of us really thought of it when we interact with people that, people are interacting with us as a personal brand and how are they experiencing our
yeah.
brand, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
that's
I
exactly
love how
right.
yeah, we are walking personal brands, whether
Yeah.
you want to be or not.
hmm Yep. Yeah. And I said to people, the minute you say hello to someone in the morning or you cuss them out at Starbucks, that's your brand. Like that's the brand you just left behind, and that's the experience you gave
Yeah.
someone. So, it does make me think a lot more consciously. And also, you bring up another point too about this sort of world we live in now, where it's very divisive, and digital media, social media makes it even more difficult.
Oof.
Um, so how do you? I mean, because you are optimistic, you are a very positive person. In the realm of trying to maintain those attributes in social media, how do you do it? Because, you can get on Twitter just to post a cat pic, you know what I mean? Or like a picture of your dinner. And next thing you know, you're like, and your
I
mama
know.
said, it,
I
it,
know.
it could be nuts. So how do you navigate that world?
I mean, the social media world is the necessary evil of what we do, right? Because you have to put that content into the world and
Mm,
let it live. Um, when the mess starts, I just delete it and block them.
mm,
Like I don't even engage. Like I'm not here to argue with you over Instagram because Instagram is not the forum.
mm.
Now, if you want to have like a proper conversation, shoot me an email. Let's have a conversation. But I'm not going to try to have a Twitter fight with you over 200 words about
Yeah.
what's happening in any part of the world right now. We have dissension in the Middle East. We have internal turmoil in the US.
Mhm.
Social media
Yeah.
is not the place for it. So if people go too nuts, I am a prolific deleter and blocker if I have to.
You
I
keep
just
your thumbs
because
ready.
yeah, it's not required. What we're doing doesn't require that we do that.
Mm,
Um, I'm not looking for like agreement all the time, but we know that when something's crossed over into something else
right.
besides just a good back and forth in dialogue.
hmm
But I think that's what you're doing, what I try to do on At the Podium is important because you're creating spaces for the dialogue to happen.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think, one thing that social media has done is that we've tried to reduce complex issues, complex thoughts that require time, investigation,
hmm
true back and forth to a certain number of characters or to one distilled image.
Mm.
And that is not the place to have meaningful conversation. So if
Wow.
you're engaged in Twitter wars with people, it's because you choose to be.
hmm
I mean, that's literally,
Yeah, I feel so seen right now. Thank you for that. Yeah, because and attacked at the same time.
and attacked.
And attacked. I feel seen and attacked. Listen, it's amazing you said what you just said, and I needed to hear it because right now I will tell you I'm grappling with Twitter. I'm grappling with it because I recently realized the algorithm is feeding me all this. I mean, people, this is already known by most people, but until you really realize it and you go to your Twitter feed and you're like, this is everything I hate. These are all the people I don't want to talk to, I don't agree with on very serious social levels. Why is this continually fed to me like poison? And it clicked. But at the same time, I have like 2 to 3 thousand people who follow me there, and I'm like, well, then if I delete the app, then I lose these people who. So I
Right.
feel like we've been like kind of trapped by this thing where I know it's a problem, but I can't get out of it. So I love your solution, which takes willpower and determination. Don't engage
Don't
in that.
engage. Don't engage. It's not because they win. The minute you
Mm,
engage with someone who's doing that, they win. There's nothing that you're going to say that's going to shift their opinion because they're not there
hmm
for that.
Right,
I
right.
mean, yeah. So yeah, I mean, the part about social media that I don't that I struggle with is not the arguing and the Twitter wars and the canceling people has got to stop left, right, center, up, like literally. Can we please stop canceling people?
Well, let's talk about that for a second. I read I heard a podcast interview with uh was it I'm not maybe Annie Leibovitz, maybe. I forgot who it
Mm,
was, but it was interesting. And I think she said um some people actually deserve cancellation. Like, there's not a blanket of that. There are some things that, like, we need to,
yes.
we need you to stop talking and go away. Maybe we are too eager to pull that cord. Maybe to that point, I think you're saying we're too eager just to cancel people without the conversation. But some people are so egregious that they do
Yes.
need it, I think.
Yeah, no one, no. So I think you're 100% right. But the thing that we don't do enough of is how can a person be restored? We talk about
Mm,
restorative justice,
yeah,
but
yeah.
are we willing to offer that to people who have offended, who have wronged us?
Hmm.
And it's a complicated issue. Like
Yeah.
I don't have a pat answer for this, but I do feel that when we cancel, we've sat in the role of judge, jury, and executioner of so many people.
Mm,
And when you step into the public domain, that's just part of what happens or could happen. But we never have the conversation about, well, how can that person come back? What can they do to ask for forgiveness? And maybe forgiveness means you can be forgiven, but you don't get to sit where you were before. That's a completely valid answer. Like you
mm,
don't get to host the Today Show anymore. That's done. But
right.
maybe you can do something else
Right.
where you
Right.
can take what you've learned and apply that, you know.
Hmm.
But I feel like the conversation stops at the cancellation. It doesn't talk about, well, what can that person do now? Because we can all develop, grow. Now, if you're
Mm,
talking about sociopathic, psychopathic people, that's a different story,
right.
you
Right.
know. But when you're talking about real mistakes that people
Hmm.
sometimes make that they're totally canceled for, um, can there be a way back? Should there be a way
Yeah.
back?
Yeah.
We should do a podcast about that,
I,
actually.
I love that. And listen, you're saying so many wonderful things that people need to hear, that so like all of us need to hear. So I'm just so grateful for that, because I grapple with that too, and it's easy to jump on the bandwagon when there's a mob mentality going after someone on social media. And it's like, it's human to want to be, yeah, yeah. It's like Frankenstein. Everyone's got the
Yeah.
torches and they're going to get the monster. Um, but you're right. Very often I will chime in, my better judgment prevails. And I say, well, wait a minute. For example, a person who tries to enter a conversation about race and they ask a genuine question, and they're white or not black, and they're asking a genuine question and they get pounced on. And I'm
Yeah.
the first one to say, hey, wait, you can't on one hand argue that people aren't trying to understand us and don't know who we are and don't get us. And then when they try to enter the conversation, you shut them down.
Yeah.
Or
Happens all the time.
right, yeah, and you're right. It's counterproductive, and we're not moving forward if we're not allowing some of that civil discourse to turn into maybe real conversation or resolve.
You just said it, Corey, civil discourse. We have moved past, we're in there were moments when we have had great civil discourse in this country. If you think about, the civil rights movement
Hmm.
of the 50s and the 60s, there was great civil discourse that happened around that. Um, that discourse has changed to just a combative
Yeah.
posture that we take with each other. And because we're now in echo chambers, if you don't hear things that jive 100% with your particular worldview, it's a big problem. But there is
Mm.
something to be said for the discourse of ideas and the exchanging of ideas, even if you don't agree with them. Um, and it creates a certain level of empathy for people when you're able to sit in a space and listen to someone who disagrees with you. One of my dearest friends um, and I are politically night and day. I
Mm.
mean, in the advent of the current GOP, we were probably more aligned than not, but very different people always. And he's one of my closest friends.
Mm.
And we do not agree politically on most anything. but yet we're still very good friends because
Mm,
that is a part, that is not the whole. And
yeah.
the fun part of our friendship, and his wife thinks we're crazy, is that we enjoy the conversation. And
Mm,
sometimes we offend each other, it goes too far, but at the end we're still friends and we
yeah.
move on. And we don't have the maturity or the empathy active right now to have those kinds of relationships with each other, you
Hmm.
know. And you talk about leadership, that's where leadership comes in, I
Yeah.
think. That's
Yeah.
where I feel the leadership is key because how they behave is how we behave. There's a direct corollary. There's no separation, right?
Yeah. And I have seen where, again, with that mob mentality, the pile-on in social media conversations. And I love it when it's happened a few times. People have actually DM'd me and say, "Hey, do you mind if we like continue this here?" Because I feel like as long as we have that audience and they're egging you on and egging me on, we're kind of in a different place than we need to be to have this conversation. And the first time that happened to me, it was with this guy who was like in Denmark or something. He's like completely different existence, but he's got all these opinions about black people in America. He's like 6'3", blonde, blue-eyed, looked like Dolph Lundgren. He's gonna tell me about being black, and I'm like, dude.
Like, wait a minute.
Wait a minute. And we really having a big blowout, but there was something I think genuinely because he thinks he knows because he's not here. He's only getting his information from secondary sources, right?
Right.
Not a black man in America living it. And he actually DM'd me and was like, I really would like to talk to you out of that Facebook thread, if you would. And he is one of my dear friends to this day, which is so great. I mean, I absolutely love him. And we have the political sparring still because he's got opinions that are valid. And we've gotten past the fact that he doesn't know. He does know a lot of stuff, and I don't agree with it, but we're still good friends.
We're still
So,
good friends.
yeah, still good friends. And so I think that's another great lesson. It's not easy, though, in this divisive political landscape. So let's just
Not easy.
be honest about that. This is some
Not
really,
easy.
I mean, what would you say about right now? Wouldn't you say, as far as I know, this is one of the most divisive times I've ever experienced on this earth, really.
Yeah. It's up there. It's definitely up there. In our lifetimes, at least.
Hmm.
I think if you look back historically, there were some pretty rough times in American history where the country was really divided. In that run up to the Civil War, that last decade before the 1850s, going into the 1860s was a super divisive time over
Hmm.
the issue of slavery and how that was going to be resolved. Um, but it's one of the most it's what's unique about this time, Corey, is that we have the access that we have to information it's nonstop and it's so fast that there is no time to even go back to your corner and take a breath. I mean,
Hmm.
I remember on the weekends, Friday at 5, everything shut down till Monday at 8. And so you could have a whole weekend with nothing happening, or if it
To
was happening, you didn't
yeah,
know about it.
to
So people
decompress
couldn't
or,
decompress.
mm,
But we're in very divisive times. But I do believe because that the pendulum swings,
mm,
that the pendulum will swing. Um, and also, again, what voices do we choose in our public discourse to amplify? Now, if we choose to run to the far extremes and amplify those voices, well, it's going to make the world seem like everyone is running around with their hair on fire. But
mm,
I travel a lot for work, and when you move around through the spaces of this country, up, down, left, right, center, no one's living like that every day.
hmm. Yeah.
No one's living like that every day. And so that's where I think we kind of have to be protective of our mind space and what we feed ourselves, because a lot of that stuff is not meant to uplift or edify. It's meant to make you afraid,
Mm,
you know,
yeah.
because everywhere I go, I don't know people's political affiliations, but people say hello. People are friendly in restaurants. The functioning of life is still happening between people who may be on different sides of many, many political,
Hmm.
hot box issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not covered because it's not interesting. It's not interesting. Oh, neighbor A and neighbor B have completely different views on should they allow their kids to, take vouchers and go to a different school. But they play baseball every weekend together. They come over for the barbecue. It's
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. Mr. Patrick Huey, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today with us. And again, I relate to it. I'm really, really happy you stopped by to talk, or you made time to talk with us today. And we would love to actually just share so much more of your story with our audience, which we'll do when this podcast is going to go live. We'll make sure you know that date. And we just say thanks for being here today on Motivational Mondays.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation. You'll have to come on at the podium. I'll have to work that out.
Oh,
Um,
of
I
course.
would love it. I would
I'd
love
be
that.
honored.
Thank
I'd
you.
be honored. Thank you.
Thank you. This is great. I appreciate the work that you're doing.